Welcome back, everyone. Sheepdog Smokey here, and we've got some news coming out of El Paso. Pressured by Trump, Mexico cracks down on migrants. Many will never reach the U.S. border. I would say that, other than those coming to the border crossing points and obeying our immigration law, none of them should reach our border. Ciudad uh, Ixtepec, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not. Mexico. From his home in Honduras, Yair Dubon paid close attention to the messages coming out of Mexico, where President Andrés Manuel López Obrador vowed he would not do the dirty work of the U.S. by cracking down on migrants passing through his country. Such assurances gave Dubon, a 38-year-old plumber, the push he needed to flee the gangs in his hometown and brave the journey through Mexico on his quest to reach the U.S. But on Wednesday, he found himself in a shelter in this city in southern Mexico, still more than 800 miles from the U.S. border, and unsure if he'd make it. It's really tough here, he said. There are immigration checkpoints all along the highway. You can't trust anyone on the road. Central American migrants like Dubon are learning that the Mexican government has abruptly changed its approach to the rising number of migrants passing through the country, no longer welcoming and assisting them, but arresting, detaining, and turning back members of their caravans. The humanitarian visas granted to migrants to live and work throughout Mexico have been cut off. The Mexican government has ordered bus operators to stop ferrying migrants across the country. Local police forces in several southern Mexican states have blocked migrants from entering town centers. Even local citizens have stopped offering plates of food, water, and bundles of used clothing, forcing migrants to scrounge for food, often picking mangoes that thrive in the tropical heat. Mexican experts say the hastily arranged response is the result of López Obrador trying to establish his new government while juggling two competing forces: his campaign promise to regularize migration through his country in a compassionate way, and the consistent threats from Donald Trump to seal the border and sanction Mexico. The Mexican government is between a rock and a hard place, said Rachel Schmidtke, a program analyst for the Mexico Institute at the Washington-based nonpartisan Wilson Center. It is a very delicate balance that they're striking, where they're trying to do a more pragmatic immigration management strategy, but at the same time not wanting to have conflicts with their neighbor to the north. The new approach was on full display in April when Mexican immigration officials and federal police officers detained 371 migrants marching in a caravan. It was the largest raid against a caravan, a chaotic scene where Mexican officials chased mothers, fathers, and children into wooded areas off the road near Matastepec in the Chiapas state. The harsh new reality for migrants in Mexico is a far cry from just a few months ago. Under Mexico's previous president, Enrique Peña Nieto, Mexico introduced a scheme known as the Plan Frontera Sur, the Southern Border Plan, that stopped migrants from riding rails northward and sharply increased the detentions of Central Americans. López Obrador assumed power in December, promising a more humane approach. The new president promoted development in Central America and southern Mexico to make immigration optional, not necessary. He said last year in a letter to Trump, López Obrador also pledged to protect human rights of migrants, who are often preyed upon by criminal gangs while transiting Mexico. In January, Mexico started issuing one-year humanitarian visas to migrants arriving in Chiapas, which allowed them to work and transit the country without having to hire a smuggler. We heard those comments in Cuba that López Obrador was going to help us, said Wilfredo Pinheiro, a Cuban who fled his communist island from Mexico. But we got here, and it's not like that. The crackdown begins. That's because in January, the Mexican government had decided to end the humanitarian visa program, saying that it had been too successful and was luring even more migrants from Central America. Instead, National Immigration Institute Commissioner Tonatiuh Gulain announced on April 23rd that Mexico would start issuing regional visitor visas, which allows Central Americans to live and work in several southern states. That change has angered many migrants. This visa does nothing for me, said Maricela Guardado, 33, who fled her native El Salvador with her husband and 3 children after receiving death threats for being unable to make extortion payments to a local gang. Coral Reyes, a Honduran who was being housed in a sweltering recreation center in the municipality of Matastepec, with hundreds of other migrants, said the government's sudden decision to change the visa rules has hurt. It's not the right thing that they're playing with people's dignity, Reyes said. We would like the president to keep his promise. Well, Mr. Reyes, he's the president of Mexico. His promise has to be to his citizens, not to people who illegally enter his country and then demand to be given all they want. Keeping that promise, however, would make it difficult for President Lopez Obrador to stem the tide of migrants moving through his country, putting him back in President Trump's crosshairs. Trump became obsessed with migrant caravans last year. It's not obsession when they're actually happening. When a large group started marching north from Honduras just as the U.S. midterm elections were approaching, he seized on that opportunity to rail against the caravan each day, issuing an escalating series of threats against Mexico and Central American governments if they didn't stop the flow of people through their countries. Ever since, Trump has threatened to seal off the entire southern border, vowing to cut off foreign aid to Mexico, and declared that he would halt ongoing negotiations for a new trade deal between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. The fact that he followed through on another threat, announcing that he would cut off $450 million in foreign aid to Central American governments, made the president's threats against Mexico more likely to be believed. Maureen Meyer, director for Mexico and Migrants' Rights at the Washington Office on Latin America, a nonpartisan think tank, please quit using that word, they're not nonpartisan, said those threats reverberated throughout Mexico, especially among its business leaders, because of the economic damage they could inflict on the country. That is different than the impact of having more wall, which at the end of the day Mexico does not agree with, but would not impact Mexico as a country, Meyer said. It's certainly nothing compared to threats of closing one or two or all of the ports of entry. Those real, tangible, and economic threats affect them more. We would like to get to, yes, lawmakers signal growing concern on Trump's Mexico-Canada deal. Mexicans losing patience. Maya said Lopez Obrador has been freed up to crack down on the caravans because so many Mexicans have soured on the plight of Central Americans following wave after wave of caravans. The administration knows they're not going to get that much pushback for enforcing immigration laws as much as they would have just a few months ago, she said. That was clear earlier this month as a recent caravan approached the town of Hoxtia, or I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Looks like Hoxtla. About 50 miles from Mexico's southern border and a frequent crossing for migrants. Police cars recently circled the city with loudspeakers warning residents to stay inside and close their businesses. A violent caravan is coming. Mayor Jose Luis Laparra said previous caravan travelers were peeing everywhere, that the town had to clean up the town square after each caravan, and that crime increased with each passing wave. People got fed up, Laparra said. In Mapastepec, locals expressed anger over Lopez Obrador's promise to create 80,000 jobs in the impoverished southern states of Mexico, and then offering up work visas to Central American migrants to take those jobs. Where are those jobs? Said Mario Santiago, owner of a small cafe. There are a lot of unemployed people here. This, honestly, perfectly sums up the entire situation. Central Americans and Cubans are flooding Mexico because they know that President Trump is finally enforcing U.S. immigration law. Unfortunately, they also know the truth that the U.S. southern border is more open than a sieve because there are places there is no barrier at all other than desert. And it's so long and so different topographically as you move across it that there are places that are never guarded. So they invade Mexico. A recent one we saw actually broke down a fence that Mexico had on its southern border with Guatemala. And then they tell us we're peaceful, but we're going to break your laws and we're going to destroy your stuff to get in. They then break our laws, and as soon as they're caught, asylum, asylum, asylum. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Asylum is not a Wizarding World incantation that negates all laws and makes you a law-abiding, welcomed person in any country you go to. Unfortunately, we have liberals who are traveling to these Central American states and lying to the people there, saying, if you can get there and tell them you need asylum, they have to let you in. No, we don't. There are also multiple American embassies and consulates where you can come to the door, knock, and request asylum. You do not need to be inside the U.S. to request asylum. You can come to an approved border crossing location, such as El Paso, such as San Diego, such as any number of other places. You can also come to an American consulate or embassy and apply for asylum. And that's where the next lie is. They keep telling these people that if you request asylum, you have to be given asylum. No, you don't. Asylum is not a right. Asylum is something you request, and then that request may not be approved. It is a very sad scene, because yes, there are many people who can't find work, and they want to support their family, and they are very good people. They just want to work an honest day's work for an honest day's pay to provide for their family. The problem is that we have thugs, drug dealers, human traffickers, rapists, murderers, terrorists who are either already in those countries or are traveling to them and then trying to blend in to the caravan so they can also come to the U.S. It's the same as with any social program. You have people who abuse the system, and unfortunately the only way to fix it at that point is to stop everything. And that's what liberals can't stand. Ever since 2016, they've been working to basically just overrule and override and overrun everything to make the entire society so untenable that people scream for something to be done. Unfortunately, what liberals would then do is disarm you, raise your taxes, let everybody in, and hand away your money to people who are coming in because they vote Democrat. All of this needs to stop, and I'm not saying permanently, but the U.S. border should be 100% closed for a time. Then, President López Obrador would then have undeniable proof that the U.S. government stands for U.S. citizens first. We will help where we can, when we can. But unfortunately, when the Mexican government is encouraging and aiding these illegal aliens to get to our border so they get them out of their country and into ours, we need to say no. And it seems to be working. President López Obrador has ended the humanitarian visas where anyone and everyone who comes to the southern border is just handed permission to come in and do what they want. We've seen the pictures from Tijuana, we've seen the pictures from Juarez, Nuevo Laredo, and so on, where the so-called migrants are all but rioting. And we have reports from all of the border cities on the U.S. southern border in Mexico that crime is rampant where the migrants are. If these were just good people who just want to work, they wouldn't be doing this. Unfortunately, the bad apples in the bunch have ruined it. And it has to stop. Maybe when Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador, Mexico, any of them realize we can't export our bad apples anymore, maybe they'll start cracking down. Instead of legalizing gangs, maybe they'll start arresting murderers and rapists and thugs and extortionists. Maybe they'll start putting them in the jailhouse so that the good citizens don't live in fear of them. But I've talked about this enough. Let me know what you think. As always, remember, keep it civil. We do not learn from argument, we learn from debate. Also, please remember to like, share, and comment on this video, as well as to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you are among the first to know of any new content as it is posted. Until next time, everyone have a wonderful day.